an old friend. Delighted to talk to. We're at with PR about this. I was at the AMEC on Thursday.
Great place.
Their relevance.
Yep.
Which is essays by sounding theme. It was 17 out with some aspect or
lack of trust, perhaps.
Say do.
Yep.
In most cases, PR is left after the smoke clears. Plain, or rather, what went down all too often, like hogwash, admission of what bridging message points, and it seems the result is for the listener anxiety. When wants to it's
yeah.
So anyways, I'm about because it's been a while since we
yeah it is. It's been a very long time and a lot's happened. Lot's happened. Well, I mean, I think, so crisis, dealing with crisis and stuff like that is kind of the reason why PR exists. I mean, I think I just wrote a piece on how the most frequent question is, how do I measure what doesn't happen? My job is to keep bad news out of the press, and therefore, how do I measure when it doesn't happen? Well, there's ways to measure everything, and it's not that hard to do. It's just that you have to kind of take a big step backwards and figure out whether that is in fact your objective. And I think the biggest thing that's happened lately that I've seen, and I work with, all kinds of different companies from B2B to B2C to, Federal Reserve banks and the IMF. So I'm sort of all over the map in terms of what the objectives are. But I think that one of the things that people are really trying to do is use PR to protect and defend the reputation of the organization or the brand or whatever it happens to be. I mean, that's sort of the number one thing that people are saying. And a lot of that has to do with not damaging it in the first place. And then secondly, making sure that that trust exists or trust is restored in the organization. And to do all those things, it's all very measurable. I mean, I've been measuring that kind of stuff forever. It's just you have to have surveys in place. You have to have clear objectives. You have to have target audiences. So it is changing a lot. I mean, PR as we knew it back last time we talked almost doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of divided into, there's still the media relations piece of it. And then there's the brand defense trust building piece of it. And never mind the, all the execution piece of it as well. But it's such a different ballgame these days because people are really trying to do different things with PR. And it's so much more visible. Board members are now looking at, PR because, oh my God, we don't want to be the subject of a Trump tweet.
So what you're saying is what you're measuring is germane to how you measure.
Yeah. I mean, it is basically the only way you can start a measurement program is by being very clear on your objectives. So if and this is where I say to people, go to the highest person in the land. I mean, whether you can get a one-on-one with your CEO or the CMO or whoever it is, your clients, whatever, but you've got to go to them and say, what do you expect me to do? What is your expectation that I can accomplish? And 9 times out of 10, the answer to that is going to be protect my reputation. Excuse me. I'm going to have to.
So, the research we see out there, continues to suggest that people hire PR because they want to get earned media. They want other people singing their praises.
Right, but that's not that's not the end goal, right? I mean, yes, they hire PR firms because they want earned media, they want placements. But why? Right? What's the purpose of that placement?
So they can hang it on their wall. So
nobody pays. I mean, either they want a story that they can use, they can give their sales force to use to sell more stuff, right? So either it's marketing qualified leads or sales qualified leads or whatever. I mean, that's one piece of it, right? Or the other reason to buy PR and get placements is that you want people to understand either your messages or your what it is that you do. You're trying to dispel a myth. You're trying to spark some consideration or generate preference. I mean, all of those things are the reason for those placements. And the problem the PR has had with measurement for the last 30 years that I've been doing it is that they can't get past my job is to create placements. No, that's not the business reason, right? I mean, if creating placements was the reason, then Boeing's done a great job of late, but I wouldn't think that anybody would think they, get an A in measurement or in communications.
Right. Marketing doesn't exist to market. It exists to to generate a customer or keep a customer or create a sale or get awareness or attention.
I mean, do you know one of the major things that I get from leadership folks is, why do I want PR? It's to attract talent, right? So the function of recruitment is now in PR because they realize that they can't attract, the best talent if you've got a bad reputation.
So we started, I was talking about this, the gap between what organizations say and what they do.
Right.
I just finished this book by the new Gladwell book, Talking to Strangers.
Yeah.
And in it, he talks about, he says, in Russian literature, there's an archetype, and it's called the Holy Fool. And the Holy Fool is a social misfit, eccentric, off-putting, sometimes even crazy, who nonetheless has access to the truth. Now, I was watching this new Apple TV Plus show with Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston called The Morning Show. And it's inspired by the Matt Lauer fiasco. It centers around, this fictitious news program, and Reese Witherspoon's character is the Holy Fool. She's this truth seeker who ignores her handlers and blurts out inconvenient truths on live television. And for it, she's a hero. A hero for being willing to speak the truth, right? So, and you think about the divide between what companies say and what they do. All these CSR programs about reducing carbon emissions and charitable giving, but nonetheless, homelessness is piling up. The homeless rates are soaring. The planet's warming. And, the public looks at it. And I mean, I think there's a lot of anxiety out there right now. People are nervous because what organizations say is not necessarily what they do. So could you see a way of measuring the gap between what organizations say and what organizations do? How would you attack that?
Well, it's funny, there's a survey that I run for many companies very frequently called the Leaders Say Do Gap. Leaders Say Do survey. And basically what it does, it starts internally and you just survey it's typically done, like I said, as an internal survey, but you ask people to think about who they see as their leader, right? For some reason, what happened? There we go. Think of their leader, whoever it is, and then they're later on asked to identify who that person is. And they say, here are the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, key priorities for the company to what extent do you see leaders talking about them? To what extent does your leader talk about them, and to what extent does your leader actually do them, or do something, or act in such a way, or take an action to support that priority? And there's no reason why you couldn't also extend that same survey externally and say, to what extent, have you heard the company talk about this, and to what extent do you see the company act in such a way to support that? It's very effective at getting alignment within organizations. I mean, if you're trying to get alignment around a new strategic plan, or, a set of strategic initiatives or whatever, it's a great way of doing it. Because obviously what the gap represents is a credibility gap. And so that's a fairly common practice these days, is to test for those sort of things. It all boils down to how, if you're a consumer company, it all depends upon how people feel about your brand, right? The extent to which, people are, in love with your brand or passionate about your brand. Nike showed that's a huge driver of sales. That's the whole Colin Kaepernick thing. That drove sales because it appealed to a certain demographic and a certain type of people. And there were a lot of people who hated it, but guess what? They weren't ever going to buy Nikes. And, the research that we did, we did a column, Mark Stoos and Angie Jeffrey and I did a column on it. And it's really interesting because, the initial response was very positive in terms of key demographics and very negative. Over time, that changed, and certain of the other very negative people originally actually over time changed their minds and became more favorable towards the ad and towards the brand. So you can measure, this goes back to the thing that I'm seeing today is the fact that people really are measuring they're measuring beliefs, they're measuring understanding of key messages, they're measuring preference and consideration. These are the measures of PR these days. And you can count all the hits and impressions you want to, but that's not going to reflect whether you're achieving your goals or not.
So, just as journalists triangulate sources to verify facts, what data sources should PR be bringing together to show its impact on the bottom line?
Well, there's sort of three core, techniques of research or metrics or whatever, and it's the triangulating your social and traditional media, right? So looking at what, first of all, is establishing what constitutes quality of your media, right? Not good press and bad press. That's too vague. Does it dispel a myth? Does it contain a visual? Does it leave you more likely to purchase? Does it, contain a key message? All of those things. Does it contain the right positioning? People have to look at the quality of the press and the degree to which it reaches your target audiences. You have to look at whether anybody responds, right? So that's social engagement as well as digital engagement. So correlating, your web analytics or your social analytics with your earned media. And then every, quarter or two, doing a survey to find out whether people are actually believing these things or changing their attitudes. That's the triangle that really good measurement is using. I think you're right.
So, sales has the CRM.
Yep.
And the marketing people, have a marketing automation platform. And the customer service people have a ticketing platform. What does PR have?
Mark Stoos's proof analytics is one thing. PR today is going in. Mark's program, if you haven't checked it out, it's a wonderful piece of technology. what he does is he can take your earned media data, your social media data, your web analytics, whatever, it inputs it all into the system and then time shifts it until it finds the length of time before it actually generates revenue. I mean, it's a very, very sophisticated, cool version of a marketing mix model. But PR is routinely now going, being some pieces of that puzzle are being fed into marketing mix models. So, I mean, the marketing mix modeling concept, and whether it's you're doing it manually in Excel because you don't have a budget, or whether you're using Proof or a marketing mix modeling system, that's really PR. That's what PR is using and or should use, is correlating PR to some kind of action, to some kind of outcome.
So we're seeing the data from the CRM and the data from the marketing automation system and the data from the customer success ticketing system be brought together and analyzed and to make business assumptions that would help organizations optimize their lead to revenue path.
Yeah.
So where does PR fit into that? How does PR plug into that model?
It's just another data set. It's basically you take the quality of your coverage and the degree to which it reaches that coverage. I mean, you take it. There's enough. I mean, this does not work if you don't get any coverage, right? I mean, it only works if you have enough volume of stuff, but that's true of any of these systems, is the fact that you just, you might need 3 years worth of data instead of 3 months worth of data. But PR data coming out of whether it's, Cision or Meltwater or Talkwalker or, any of these systems, it's just more data. It just goes into that data model as earned media as opposed to paid media.
What if you're a niche B2B and there isn't a lot of media attention on your niche, whatever it may be, but most of your PR resources are being invested in content marketing or owned media, your own blog that you're SEOing, or social media engagement that you're working towards. How might that data be introduced into a marketing mix model so that PR could prove its worth?
Yeah, it basically the challenge is, again, what's the purpose, right? So if you're a niche B2B player and you're doing a lot of content marketing and the goal is to generate, what's the goal, right? Is the goal to generate marketing qualified leads or whatever? I mean, then you're taking your CRM data and you're correlating it. You're tagging your earned media data and you're tagging it and correlating it with your CRM data. I mean, I have clients that when they're good and they are religious about tagging their content with PR. I mean, literally, they sometimes just go /PR if that's the name of the department, and that data goes in to a CRM system, and PR is given credit for the sales. I mean, if you're Southwest Airlines, you've been doing that stuff for 10 years, but there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing that, or associations where you're selling seminars and you're selling books and you're selling all the rest of that stuff, and they're basically just tagging the PR driven content and attributing the revenue that it comes into them.
Where should the data live? Should it live in the CRM? Do you like in a perfect world, do you take everything into a data lake and then from there into some sort of BI platform, business intelligence platform that you like?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Google Data Studio, especially for clients that don't have the budget or the resources to have a big fancy CRM system. I'd much rather see it in a dashboard like business. What's Microsoft's BI? Power BI. Google data, it's basically where it's living for my clients for the most part. It's living in Google Data Studio, Power BI, or Tableau, something like that. It's taking that data in from all those different systems into a dashboard system like that.
And then, I guess it's pretty important that the sales, that the financial data be there too, so you can see, what's.
Well, actually, the reality is the fact that most organizations already put all that stuff, all their financial data, their marketing data, their sales data, it's already living in some kind of a corporate dashboard anyway. And the big, revolutionary concept is, let's put the earned media in there as well. But a lot of these places already have, they're already using Power BI or Tableau or something to track everything else. The only thing they're missing is the earned media piece.
Katie, when does AI make it easier to start reading the tea leaves?
Well, it's already doing it. I mean, let me just say one other thing about where does stuff live. Interestingly enough, a lot of the systems like the Meltwaters and Cisions and Talkwalkers and folks like that, all of those systems today can incorporate Google Analytics data or your financial or your stock prices or any of that stuff. They're all designed now, not all of them, but some of them are designed to be flexible enough to have it all live in your PR system, right? So they're just pulling in Google Analytics and stock price and anything else that you want to throw in there so that it's all in one dashboard. Now, I don't think that's the best solution. I'd rather see it in one corporate database, but dashboard. But where AI is coming along already is AI is, the old sentiment analysis that I railed against for so many years and thought was a piece of garbage. It's now being validated with human coding so that you can basically take your human coding and use machine learning to make your systems much more accurate and start to look for really more complex things. It used to be that I'd say, if your message is, Cisco is in the networking business, a machine can probably figure that one out. If you're saying, Cisco is the most trusted name in networks, that's a lot harder to get a computer to understand trust. And I've tried it. I've used it on a couple of different occasions. And like as of a couple of years ago, it didn't work, right? You could not get a computer to understand concepts like trust or innovation or things like that. The AI is better. The systems are better now, and we're getting a whole lot closer. I still believe you have to, one of my, joys of my life is to go in there and audit and check clients' data to find out whether these things that they've automated actually are doing things accurately. But that's where there's two places. The other thing that I'm working on a project right now where if you have enough data, AI gets to be very useful. And again, goes back to, there's so many cases where you just don't have enough data. If you're, as you said, if you're a niche B2B company, really hard to get enough data. But what we're doing now is looking at data over a period of time, classifying crises, and trying to figure out what the most effective crisis response is. So using some, SCCT theory, crisis theory stuff, and using AI to try and predict what the best way to handle a crisis is. So we're getting there, right? We're a long way from having it be sort of normal to be able to, push the AI button and get your data results, but it's getting better.
I read an amazing book by this guy, Cal Newport, called Deep Work. And it's all about, the benefits of focused, deep concentration at creating high-level work, eliminating distraction. And he talks sort of about what he says He says metrics that fall into an opaque region resistant to easy measurement are what he calls the metric black hole. And some of the examples he cites of behaviors for which there's no concrete metrics proving their value, but which nonetheless flourish in business today are CEO salaries and open office floor plans that prioritize collaboration over concentration. So the question is there a PR measurement black hole? And if so, what is it?
Oh, I think the biggest thing that should go into a black hole and stay there is things like impressions and all the old things we used to measure, because most companies, other than a few consumer companies, you're not targeting everybody on the planet. And when they report, oh, I got, 9 trillion impressions. Well, who cares? There's only, 7 billion people on the planet. Half of them don't have a computer or whatever it is you need to run your system or have the money to buy your products. You don't care about them, right? You care about generally, the million, the 100,000, the 1,000 people that actually can. I mean, my favorite one was when we used to do work for Raytheon. And, anytime anybody would give us pushback about why we weren't using impressions to count everything, my client would say, hey, there's only 1,000 people on the planet who can legally buy these things. Okay, so we don't need to reach anything more than those. And so, really focusing on the people that actually buy your product, the people you really want to target. Anything beyond that is the black hole. And so impressions are one thing. Frankly, badly counted mentions can be that way if it's appearing in a publication that doesn't matter. 90% of the social engagement stuff is baloney. First of all, it's coming from troll farms and bots and everything else. And nobody believes those big numbers anyway. And so all that really matters is, really, did people go to your website and do something you wanted them to do? Did they show up at your event? Did they sign your petition? Or did you change their minds, right? What was the outcome? And so I think everything else can go into the black hole as far as I'm concerned. There's a process that I go through with my clients where I say, look, revenue is the ultimate goal of everything, right? So whatever you are, other than if you're a government agency, you're trying to save your budget, but you're also, trying to get people to behave in a certain way. But let's walk backwards from that end goal to say, okay, if I come into the office and I organize an event, how does that event contribute to the revenue? And, it takes all kinds of different paths, and, we have a long conversation about that, but it's what I call, you come up with acceptable proxies, right? You don't necessarily say, because I did this over here, I made this sale. That's never going to happen. But you're going to say, okay, what's an acceptable proxy for consideration, right? Is it spending 5 minutes on your website on 37 different places? Or is it downloading a white paper? Is it showing up at your event and talking to somebody for an hour? What are the acceptable proxies along the way that indicate movement in that direction, even if you can't directly, measure attribution?
So what behaviors in PR flourish despite a lack of metrics that prove their value?
Say that one again. What behaviors?
What do we do in PR? What actions are we doing? What behaviors do we continue to do in our effort to promote organizations or brands for which there's no metrics to prove their value?
Oh, I would argue that there aren't any, right? That I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's nothing I haven't been able to measure. So I would argue that there's very little you can't measure. It's the issue is can you measure it instantly? No, you may need to do a survey. That might take a while. You might only be able to do a survey once every quarter or once every 6 months. But if you're trying to change people's beliefs about your brand or trying to get people to understand a message, you're going to have to do a survey because that's how people, that's how you test whether people believe things. It's the instantaneous feedback thing that everybody thinks you should have, which is, that belongs in the black hole too. Because I think you have to go back to your goal. And if the goal is, I want people to act in a certain way or change their beliefs, then I have to measure that. And that's all that matters, right? And the number of likes or the number of followers might be an indicator that more people are paying attention, more people are engaging with my brand. That might be an acceptable proxy in the right situations. But, frankly, it may not be for somebody else. I mean, I think a lot of these, it goes back to the whole, influencer marketing stuff, which makes me crazy, because influencer marketing is nothing more than, PR 101 back in the 70s with, social media added in. And you sit there and say, okay, well, how much did I sell? That's what you're measuring. That's great, right? But if you're measuring, exposure and media value somehow, you're just misleading people as to what's really going on.
Is there a way in the social media age to sort of break out the impact of influencer marketing on sales versus advertising versus other channels? I mean, would that be the value of influencer marketing in the social media age?
From a cost efficiency, excuse me.
That's you.
From a cost efficiency standpoint, you can break it out. I mean, you can look at your budget for influencer marketing and see, the extent you can, cost per engagement or cost per touch point or cost per whatever it is. I mean, you're looking at what does it cost me to reach a person that I want to reach. And, it's cost per click through in digital. It's cost per lead. You just have to apply those same things in some way, shape, or form to the earned media piece of the puzzle, right? What does it cost you to get people to your event?
Earlier, we were talking about, how different objectives require different measurement approaches.
Yep.
Do you have some sort of a framework for understanding this, for explaining this?
Well, I mean, the AMEC Framework is kind of, and my version of the AMEC framework is that you basically start out with your business objectives, your communications objectives, and obviously the two should connect. And communications has to have an explanation of how communications contributes to those business objectives, right? That's the first thing. That's the VP of Comms has to make that argument, which is, this is what I'm doing and this is how it's relating to the business objectives. And then you get into campaign activities, and the campaign activity metrics relate absolutely back to those objectives. And if they don't relate back to those objectives, then don't measure it, right? It's very simple. It's like, I mean, I start at, my version of this is, I start out with, what's your champagne moment, right? What's the thing that's going to so delight your boss, he or she is going to give you a case of champagne. That's your objective, right? That's the big, hairy goal out there. Now, what indicators are there that you're making progress towards that? And so that's when you have the conversation about whether it's, clicks or responses or engagement or comments or whatever it happens to be, stories containing your key messages, quality coverage, whatever those things are. You have that conversation and say, okay, if we have this conversation about from sales, so you start from sales or from marketing, and you say, okay, in order to convince somebody to buy my product or do what I want them to do, I have to make a good argument. That's called your message. That's got to be in a story. I probably have to have a visual because that's going to get everybody's attention. Maybe I need an endorsement from an influencer, from, somebody important. Maybe I have to be, prominent in a story, right? Whatever it happens, whatever those characteristics of a story that are going to have persuasive powers on your audience, that's what I count. I count that as a quality story, and I say, okay, the more of them I get, do you accept that that's a proxy for conveying those things that convince people to buy do business with you or buy your products or whatever? I mean, Procter & Gamble did this years ago and said, look, we know that in order to sell a bottle of shampoo, we have to hit a certain number of people with an ad or earned media, a story or something that contains a beautiful photograph of a woman's hair, an endorsement from a stylist, and some brand benefits. And so, that's how they measured their advertising effectiveness. And I said, well, I can tell you whether those things are in your PR. And they said, oh, well, in that case, I can use, predictive modeling to say how many bottles of shampoo I'm going to sell as a result of this PR campaign. That was 20 years ago. And more organizations today are using that approach to say, here are the things in earned media that mimic what is in my paid stuff, so that we're reasonably convinced that people will act in the way we want them to act.
There's a lot of about this concept of or usually for service online, and in his LinkedIn founder, fast-growing tech be that customer acquisition, despite all prioritize certainty, is right to do for measurement scenario in that environment.
Well, first of all, I don't think you can survive. I mean, I think one of the problems with rapid growth for the sake of rapid growth is you forget the concept of retention. And if you're doing huge amounts of churn, it doesn't, you can do that for so long, and then, let's just talk about WeWork. There's a lot of downsides for not looking at a more holistic measure of success. And I think with PR, yes, there's a lot of PR that's done to get a lot of attention. But it's got to be with the right people and the right audience and with the right message, because otherwise either you're going to attract the people you don't want, you're going to attract people and then lose them, or you're going to waste a hell of a lot of money, generating exposure that's not effective. I don't see how you can. I mean, early on in the Facebook days, we correlated a lot of different elements of their media coverage to user acquisitions, and there was a very strong correlation between positive coverage of Facebook back in the day and new user signups, right? But the moment that they had a trust scandal of some sort, the moment there was news out there that they had violated somebody's trust or privacy or whatever, there was a huge dip. So you've got to look at both sides of the coin, which is that, you can generate lots of attention and lots of growth, but the moment that you lose trust with your audience base, if you're not monitoring for trust or not monitoring for loyalty or something, it's gonna scale down very quickly. So what PR people need to do is to look at not just, growth of exposure and even growth of exposure of your key messages, but, somewhere in there, it has to tie back to trust and retention and loyalty and things like that, all of which are highly measurable. It's just that it's not going to come in a box from Cision.
So, with all your experience looking at numbers, are there any generalizations you've drawn about what PR professionals should be focusing on to maximize value?
Yeah, well, actually, you want to hear the biggest revelation, and I'm not sure that it's a big ha-ha moment, but it does turn out that when you run a whole bunch of correlations between, when I work with a client, we typically have anywhere between 5 and 7 different criteria that constitutes quality of an article, right? So every article has a score, and that score is somewhere on a scale of -10 to +10 in terms of quality. And obviously, Boeing killing 346 people would be a -10. Some lovely positive news story is a +10. Most stuff, if you think of, journalists would like it all to be 0 with no bias one way or the other. And, it goes up and down depending upon what's going on in the news. And so I look at that quality score as a big time indicator of whether I'm doing my job right. Now, when you separate all of those 6 elements out there and say, okay, which one is the biggest driver in terms of engagement or in terms of positive response, when I've got my Google Analytics data to look at, visuals are the biggest driver. And I'd love to say, having the right messages in there is important. And sort of a defined positive tone is obviously important, but visuals are number one above and beyond everything in terms of getting people to act and getting people to pay attention.
So, Bant, this concept of Bant is a sales qualification methodology for measuring whether a prospect's a good fit based on B, budget, A, authority, purchasing authority, N, need, and T, timing, purchase timeline. So, for many years, this concept of Bant was how leads were evaluated. Does the person have budget? Do they have authority? Do they have need? Do they have a timeline? So in B2B markets where top funnel prospects are limited, like Raytheon, for example, how can you use metrics to convince salespeople to invest time in building relationships with prospects who may not have an immediate need, but who may develop one down the road?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, Raytheon has such a specific client base. It doesn't translate. I mean, outside of defense, it doesn't translate very well. I think that where it gets more relevant is in the sort of. I'm just trying to think about a good example of a client where they're using that concept, but I think it's really that PR. I think PR needs to go in the opposite direction. I would actually argue against what you just said, because I think PR, so many people in PR for so long have focused on audience for audience sake. Impressions, huge impression numbers is all that mattered. And they were reaching all these people that really didn't matter. And it was a waste of time, effort, and energy. And they counted stuff that shouldn't be counted because it didn't matter. And I'm on the bandwagon to say, guys, let's focus in on the people who are actually going to buy your product or going to have some interest in your product, and focus in very carefully on the audiences that are going to be receptive to your messages. And that's where AI comes in, because AI can get much, much better in terms of, I just saw a program yesterday that takes Twitter data characteristics and Google Analytics characteristics and can actually tell you the extent to which the people that you are reaching like certain sports or certain things to do or something. I mean, it's amazing how, that kind of data can now inform you in terms of whether you are in fact reaching your target audience. It also informs you as to, it turns out that, everybody who loves Raytheon missiles also happens to like baseball or chess, that tells you where you need to, be. But we're getting a lot more sophisticated in being able to identify the right people to go after. And I'm the one who's always saying, count what counts, measure what matters. Don't waste time, effort, and energy reaching the universe out there. Because if you think about B2B organizations, especially ones that, never mind, the ones that take a year to build a product, but even something that takes a long, several months to build, you don't want 1 million new customers one day. You could have the best PR program in the world and the campaign can take off, and all of a sudden you get 1 million people beating down your door. This is how so many businesses went out of work with, Groupon, right? So suddenly they've got all these people beating out their doors and they can't keep up.
Lead to revenue. Earlier, an MQL. That's sort of the marketing. Lead is ready for. Of course, sales has their own the sales qualified lead, the SQL, and these are all steps on the way from lead to revenue. But they're inconclusive in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But if the objective is predicting or forecasting sales, how are we supposed to value these sorts of lead measures? Contribute, but don't necessarily guarantee revenue.
Right, but PR is never going to win that argument. PR doesn't have any place to go in that argument. Yes, there are anecdotal things about somebody reading a story and buying a product. Yes, there are. If you embed tags and you have a good CRM system, yes, I'm sure you can show that you've sold things, as my clients have done. But in general, when you try in today's society, when you try to prove attribution, first of all, sales is always going to take credit for it anyway, no matter what PR does. And then secondly, it's not a single source attribution model anymore. I tell this story about how I sent a check for $25 to my public radio station because I lost 5 pounds because I listened to a PR program that some PR person obviously put on the air at some point in DC, and it was Pat Benatar. I went out and I bought Pat Benatar's stuff and I ran faster and I improved my time and I lost 10 pounds. So I sent a check to my local, NPR station. That's attribution today, right? It's all over the map and you're never going to be able to count all those stuff. So, to a certain extent, I really fight PR people who say, the objectives is sales. I think you can say the objective is preference and consideration, engagement with a brand, convince them of the correctness of your positioning. But attribution models today I just think it's a losing battle. And I also think that, doing things like where the only place it makes sense is if you look at things like, cost per touch point, cost per time spent with a prospect, right? If it takes 3 hours to convince somebody to buy your product, and PR is responsible for, getting people into a booth at a show, and it turns out that they can, talk to people for 20 minutes for less money than it costs to do a sales call or something else, then that makes sense. But I think that trying to tie PR efforts directly back to a lot of that stuff is just you're not going to find out what you need to know, especially in B2B, unless you've got to have a lot of sales in order to do these correlations. You can't just have, I just sold one airplane or one widget that takes a long time to sell. And really what you're trying to do is just create the atmosphere in the marketplace that says that, I'm the right vendor that you should choose.
I was talking from someone from Meltwater who said they're working on some sort of a PR attribution measurement tool. Ditto the folks at Intrado, which is
and AirPR,
and who else?
and AirPR and Cision also are doing the same thing. It's an attribution model that assumes a lot of stuff, right? I mean, it assumes that the goal is a goal conversion in Google Analytics. Great. If you can translate you can create in Google Analytics a goal conversion that everybody agrees with, yeah, that's not that hard. I saw it yesterday in Meltwater. You can do that stuff. And you can do that in any number of dashboards.
Just to pin you down on that for a second, you're saying that they already have a way to track a click from a third-party news story over to a destination website.
Well, that's what Cision claims they can do, and that's what everybody claims that they can do.
I haven't heard anybody claiming it. I know they're working on it.
Yeah, they're
based on the data that the ad networks have, it is a solvable problem, but I haven't actually seen it live yet.
Nobody's actually seen it live, so no, I did not see that yesterday. What I saw was the ability to do correlations, which I think is the best you're going to get today. I mean, to go from a news story and to track that back is imminently doable, but by very few companies, right? It's imminently doable for Google and Bing and Firefox, where you control all the data, and Apple, I'm sure, has some way of doing it too. But if you don't control all that data, or you don't negotiate for control of all that data, first of all, they're not even most of these companies aren't even tracking the individual pages that a story shows up on, right? I mean, they're giving you ComScore data for the New York Times. Well, if I'm on the educational page on Sunday of the New York Times, I'm not reaching 40 million people. Doesn't matter. I'm reaching the 5,000 people that matter.
The same technology that's used for retargeting could be used for, figuring out who's going from where to where.
Yeah.
Right. If I was on the, educational page and there's a cookie and I'm served an ad and that information gets aggregated by some sort of an advertising platform, couldn't I then just buy that data to figure out who's coming from the story over to my website and then track them to make a purchase? I don't know. It may not be legal. I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing. It was very interesting. We had the summit on the future of measurement a month ago, and it probably isn't going to be legal. I mean, it's basically a lot of the people that were here basically said, guys, GDPR is coming to California, and that's going, and GDPR has already basically made it incredibly challenging, if not impossible, to do that kind of stuff. Yeah. And if that law passes in California, you just have to give it up. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. There's, all sorts of discussion about whether that law will pass, but I think, we should certainly be prepared for it to pass.
But the point is the objective of your PR program to sell stuff? And I have to tell you, Eric, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of PR people in the last 6 months, and nobody says that's their goal. Their goal is to enhance and protect their reputation, to attract and keep talent, to enhance their reputation within certain markets like investors or, institutional investors, or, new graduates, or certain demos for sales. But that's not PR's goal, so therefore they shouldn't be measuring it. They should be measuring.
But if what you say is true, then there's all sorts of companies that shouldn't be doing PR, because there's a lot of companies that do PR that don't have those needs. They have different needs.
So there's two different elements to this. One is, if I'm a product person right? I'm a product manager. I'm going to do PR because it's a cheap way to get the messages out there, right? But if I'm, the VP of comms at, Aflac or Clorox or any of the, or Procter and Gamble or any of those brands out there, the purpose of PR is, generating trust and loyalty and, a good reputation and protecting the brand. And this goes back to
e-commerce startup or a small company or a small restaurant. I mean, there's all sorts of small businesses that would use PR to generate sales.
Yeah, but I have yet to find anybody. I mean, I just said, all the people I've talked to, it's not seen as a primary function of PR.
So give us this, okay? What are the biggest problems you're seeing now out there?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest problem is weaning people off of dumb metrics. I mean, there's so much data out there, and there's so many dumb metrics out there that people are paying attention to. I mean, I got a report from a client that had 153 metrics on it every quarter. I'm like, who looks at this stuff? And if you're not correlating it or comparing it or triangulating it, what does it all mean? Right? So people are drowning in all of these data points, none of which matter. So I think the problem is too much data, not enough insight. That's the biggest problem. The lack of validity of the data, right? So much of the data that's out there is, especially on the social earn side, is bots, it's troll farms, the most terrific story I've read lately is this Guardian piece where this woman went underground in a Polish troll farm, and a PR agency in Europe hired the troll farm to badmouth Lockheed. It was Lockheed. Lockheed was up for a contract with a Eastern European major contract. And the troll farm was spreading completely false rumors about Lockheed.
I've got to see this story. I want to read this story. It sounds great.
It's on my Twitter feed. It's on everybody's. I'll send it to you. But
I'm dying to read it. I want to get somebody from a troll farm on this on the webinar.
Well, you might be able to get the reporter that wrote the story, because she infiltrated it, and it was just said,
great.
Nobody. And the thing that was so interesting,
I really want it. Don't forget to send
nobody at the troll farm thought that they were doing anything bad. Nobody talked about the ethics of what they were doing. Many of the people that were working there couldn't get jobs anywhere else because they were physically handicapped, and so it was much easier for them to do these things. I mean, it's a really ethically tortured situation out there. But yeah, I mean, they were bad mouthing Lockheed so that the Airbus local contractors could get the job.
When social media first appeared and we were all excited at these conferences talking about it, and we thought it was going to make the world a better place. I mean, I didn't think the trolls were coming. Did you? I mean, I didn't foresee this.
Shell Israel is probably one of the last times, I can't even remember where we were. We were in Chicago. Shell Israel and I had dinner the night before this conference, and it was 2007, and I was absolutely convinced that social media was going to bring peace on earth and goodwill to all men and solve all the problems. And now it's just like it's everybody's worst nightmare. It's so sad.
Did Shell predict it?
He was a little more skeptical than I was. But both of us were, dreamy about this whole concept, because everybody was going to have to be more honest, and everybody was going to have to be more, open and everything else. I mean, it just is.
We didn't know that we'd be so flooded with misinformation that it would be impossible to find the truth, because people who were getting paid to share would overwhelm the rest of us who are trying to get paid to pay our bills.
Well, we also didn't realize the mendacity and evil genius of Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and people like that, who really have, gone to the dark side in terms of we want. Now, Twitter so much now that they've switched their policy. But I mean, it's like, it's so about, just making these people richer.
Yeah. I don't know if you watch Fareed Zakaria on Sunday, but he writes also a column in the Washington Post. But interestingly enough, he said about the whole, Facebook not declining political advertising. He said, look, look, think back and remember, it was Murdoch who acquired MySpace. If MySpace would have won the social network award, would you want Murdoch deciding what political ads should go on there? So his whole thing was like, look, it's got to be open. Censorship is not the way to go. So I thought it was kind of interesting. I'll say you send me the troll.
I'll send you the Guardian article.
I'll send you the Zakaria. Thank you so much. So nice to catch up with you.
Thank you. Great to catch up with you. Hope to see you in real life sometime soon. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.